Moscow, August 1945. The American ambassador resides in Spaso House, an elegant mansion in the heart of the Soviet capital. The war in Europe has just ended. The alliance between America and the Soviet Union is strained but holding. Diplomacy continues, cautious and careful, as two superpowers begin to eye each other with growing suspicion. A delegation of Soviet school children arrives at the embassy. A goodwill gesture, they say, building friendship between nations. The children are well rehearsed, polite, singing songs and presenting gifts. And their centerpiece offering is magnificent, a hand-carved wooden replica of the Great Seal of the United States. The seal is beautiful, nearly 2 feet in diameter, intricately carved, displaying the eagle clutching arrows and olive branch, the shield upon its breast, the motto, E pluribus unum, woven through the design. The craftsmanship is exquisite. The gesture seems genuine. Ambassador Averell Harriman accepts the gift graciously, thanks the children, admires the workmanship, and then, as protocol dictates, he hangs it in his private study, in the room where he conducts sensitive conversations, where he discusses classified matters with visiting officials, where America's diplomatic strategy in the Soviet Union is planned and debated. The seal hangs there for 7 years, through multiple ambassadors, through the descent of the Iron Curtain, through the Berlin airlift and the Korean War, through 1,000 sensitive conversations, confidential briefings, classified discussions. It hangs there, silent and beautiful, a symbol of American sovereignty displayed prominently in the ambassador's most private space. And every word spoken in that room travels to Soviet intelligence, every secret shared, every strategy discussed, every confidence exchanged between American diplomats who believe they are speaking in absolute privacy, because hidden inside that wooden seal, embedded in its carved depths with such skill that no inspection reveals it, is a listening device unlike anything the world has seen before. A technological marvel that requires no power source, no batteries, no wires. A device so ingenious that when it is finally discovered, American intelligence will spend years trying to understand how it works. What the Soviets planted in that ambassador's study in 1945 would not be found until 1952, and when it was discovered, it would reveal that the Cold War was being fought not just with spies and soldiers, but with physics itself. The story of the Great Seal bug begins with a man named Leon Theremin, known in the West primarily as the inventor of the theremin, the electronic musical instrument that produces eerie sounds without physical contact. Theremin is also one of the Soviet Union's most brilliant engineers, but his life has taken a dark turn. In 1938, during Stalin's purges, Theremin is arrested, sent to a labor camp, later transferred to a sharashka, a special prison where scientists and engineers are forced to work on projects for the Soviet state. He develops technology under duress, his brilliance exploited by the very system that imprisoned him. Among his projects is something revolutionary, a listening device that operates on principles no Western intelligence agency has encountered. It uses no active electronics, requires no power supply, cannot be detected by the standard sweeps that look for radio transmissions or electrical currents. The principle is elegant and diabolical. A small resonant cavity, shaped precisely, responds to sound waves. When someone speaks nearby, the sound causes a thin diaphragm in the cavity to vibrate. These vibrations alter the cavity's resonant frequency ever so slightly. By itself, this does nothing. The device is completely passive. But if an external radio signal of the right frequency is beamed at it from outside the building, that signal reflects back with its modulation, changed by the vibrating diaphragm. The reflected signal carries the audio information, encoded in the frequency variations. In other words, the device is a microphone that only works when activated by an external radio beam. When that beam is not present, the device is completely inert. It emits nothing, draws no power, gives no indication of its existence. This is the technology embedded in the wooden Great Seal presented to Ambassador Harriman. A passive resonator, carefully tuned, positioned so that conversations in the study will cause its diaphragm to vibrate. And somewhere nearby, probably in a building across the street, with line of sight to Spaso House, Soviet intelligence operates a transmitter beaming radio waves at the ambassador's study. The reflected signal, modulated by conversations in the room, is picked up by a receiver, demodulated, recorded. Every word spoken in that room for 7 years is heard by the Soviets. The Americans suspect nothing. The device is so far ahead of their own technology that they do not even conceive of searching for something like it. Their security sweeps look for active transmitters, for electrical signatures, for anything broadcasting. They find nothing because the bug broadcasts nothing. It only reflects. Ambassador Harriman leaves Moscow in 1946. George Kennan arrives as ambassador in 1952. The seal remains in the study, transferred from one ambassador to the next, like any other piece of furniture. A gift from Soviet children, a symbol of attempted friendship, a beautiful piece of craftsmanship that nobody questions. But by 1952, the Cold War has intensified dramatically. The Soviets have the atomic bomb, thanks partly to spies like Klaus Fuchs. The Korean War rages. Both sides pour resources into intelligence gathering, into understanding what the enemy knows and plans. The discovery happens almost by accident. A British radio operator monitoring Soviet communications notices something strange. A signal emanating from the vicinity of the American embassy. Not a normal broadcast. Something odd. A signal that seems to carry audio, but only intermittently, and only when the Soviet transmitter beam is active. The British share their findings with the Americans. The CIA and State Department security teams descend on the Moscow embassy. They begin a comprehensive sweep, looking for any surveillance devices. They check phones, inspect walls, examine light fixtures, standard procedure. But this time, they're looking specifically for something that might be activated by external radio signals. They find nothing at first. The sweep reveals no transmitters, no bugs, no obvious surveillance equipment. The building seems clean, but the British signal intercepts continue. Something in that embassy is reflecting audio back to the Soviets. Finally, someone gets creative. They bring in a radio frequency scanner and methodically illuminate different objects with radio signals while monitoring for reflected audio, room by room, object by object, a painstaking process that takes days. And then, in the ambassador's study, when they illuminate the wooden Great Seal with radio waves, the scanner picks up a reflected signal, a signal modulated by ambient sound in the room. They speak, and the reflection changes. They clap, and the reflection responds. The seal is removed from the wall, examined, X-rayed, and there, hidden inside the carved wood, they find it. A small cylindrical device, perhaps the size of a coin, embedded so skillfully that no external inspection revealed its presence. The Americans are stunned. Not just that they have been surveilled for 7 years, though that is shocking enough, but by the technology itself. This device operates on principles they have not seen before. It has no batteries, no wires, no obvious power source, yet it clearly functions as a microphone when illuminated by radio waves. The CIA brings in their best engineers. They disassemble the device carefully, photograph every component, try to understand how it works, and slowly, over weeks of analysis, they piece together the ingenious simplicity of Theramin's design. The implications are terrifying. Every conversation in the ambassador's study for 7 years was potentially compromised. Every classified discussion, every strategic planning session, every confidence shared between American officials who believed they were speaking in complete security. Who knows what the Soviets learned, what policies they anticipated, what negotiations they prepared for in advance, what strategies they countered before they could be implemented. The damage assessment is catastrophic. Not just the immediate loss of specific secrets, but the broader strategic disadvantage of having the enemy hear your internal deliberations for years. The Soviets knew America's position before negotiations began, knew the limits of what America would accept, knew the internal debates and disagreements among American officials. In poker, this is seeing your opponent's cards. In diplomacy, it is just as decisive. The State Department immediately begins damage control. They do not announce the discovery publicly, cannot afford to reveal the extent of the breach or the sophistication of Soviet surveillance capabilities. Instead, they quietly replace key personnel, review and revise policies that might have been compromised, begin using different rooms for sensitive conversations. But internally, the panic is real. If the Soviets could embed a device like this in the Great Seal, what else have they compromised? The entire embassy is swept again, more thoroughly. Other American facilities around the world are inspected. Procedures are revised, security protocols enhanced, and American intelligence begins trying to develop countermeasures. If the Soviets have passive resonator bugs, how do you detect them? Standard radio frequency sweeps will not work because the devices do not emit unless activated. You need to illuminate them with radio signals and monitor for reflections, but that requires knowing the right frequencies, the right angles, the right techniques. The technology race escalates. The Americans develop more sophisticated detection equipment. The Soviets refine their surveillance techniques, each side pushing the boundaries of what is possible, turning physics and engineering into weapons of espionage. The Great Seal bug represents a watershed moment in intelligence tradecraft. It demonstrates that surveillance technology has advanced beyond simple hidden microphones and crude transmitters, that the Soviets have brilliant engineers developing devices that Western intelligence has not conceived of, that the game has changed in fundamental ways. Leon Theramin, the man who invented the device, remains imprisoned in the Sharashka system for years. He is eventually released in the 1960s, returns to working on electronic music, and lives until 1993. But his role in creating the Great Seal bug remains secret for decades. Only after the Soviet Union's collapse does the full story emerge. Did he want to create a surveillance device? Or was he, like so many scientists in totalitarian systems, forced to apply his brilliance to purposes he would not have chosen? The historical record suggests coercion. Theramin was imprisoned, threatened, made to work under conditions that left him no real choice. His genius was weaponized by a state that imprisoned him. This is part of the darker side of the Cold War. Brilliant minds conscripted, their talents turned to espionage and surveillance. Scientists working not from conviction but from fear, creating technologies that advance the intelligence war regardless of their personal beliefs. The Great Seal, bug itself, becomes a symbol. When the story is finally declassified and revealed, it appears in museums and documentaries as perhaps the most famous listening device in espionage history. The wooden seal, with its hidden cavity and ingenious resonator, represents the intersection of art and espionage, craftsmanship and surveillance. But more than that, it represents vulnerability. The idea that even in your most secure locations, in rooms swept regularly by security teams, with guards and protocols and every precaution, you can still be compromised by technology you do not understand, embedded by adversaries more ingenious than you anticipated. The psychological impact on American diplomats is profound. How do you conduct sensitive business when you cannot be certain your conversations are private? How do you trust the security of your facilities when a simple wooden carving concealed a listening device for 7 years? The answer is that you become paranoid. Appropriately paranoid. You assume every room is compromised. You conduct the most sensitive conversations outdoors, away from buildings. You use code words and vague language, even in supposedly secure spaces. You trust nothing. This is the espionage mindset that the Great Seal bug helped create. The assumption that the enemy is always listening, that technology enables surveillance in ways you have not imagined, that security is never absolute, only probabilistic. The Soviets, for their part, never publicly acknowledged the bug, neither confirmed nor denied its existence or capabilities. Standard practice in intelligence work. Let the enemy wonder what else you might have, what other capabilities you possess, what other surveillance devices might be hidden in their facilities. And the Americans wondered. Every diplomatic facility was swept repeatedly. New protocols required that sensitive conversations happen in specially constructed secure rooms lined with materials that block radio signals, swept constantly for any signs of surveillance. The cost of security escalated dramatically. The Great Seal bug demonstrated that passive devices could evade detection, so new techniques had to be developed. Active illumination sweeps became standard. Rooms were inspected, not just visually, but with X-rays and ultrasound. Objects brought into secure facilities were examined with a level of paranoia that would have seemed absurd before 1952. But after the Great Seal, nothing seemed absurd. If the Soviets could embed a listening device in a wooden carving presented by children, what else were they capable of? The answer seemed to be almost anything. The technology itself evolved rapidly after the discovery. Western intelligence, understanding the principle, developed their own passive resonator bugs. The Soviets, knowing their technology had been discovered, moved on to even more sophisticated devices. The surveillance arms race accelerated, each side trying to stay ahead of the other's detection capabilities. By the 1960s, passive resonator technology was well understood by both sides. But that did not make it obsolete, because even when you know such devices exist, detecting them remains challenging. You must illuminate every object in a room with radio signals at multiple frequencies, monitoring for modulated reflections. The process is time-consuming and requires sophisticated equipment, and the Soviets continued innovating. Passive devices hidden in building materials, in furniture, in typewriters, famously, where the key strikes could be monitored to reveal what was being typed. The embassy in Moscow became a battleground of surveillance and counter-surveillance, each side constantly probing for weaknesses, constantly defending against the other's capabilities. The Americans eventually built a new embassy in Moscow in the 1970s. But that project became its own disaster when it was discovered that Soviet construction workers employed during the building process had embedded surveillance devices throughout the structure. The building had to be partially demolished and rebuilt. The costs were staggering. The lesson of the Great Seal bug was never fully learned. Or perhaps it was learned, but the problem it revealed has no solution. When you operate in hostile territory, when you must maintain facilities in countries run by adversaries with sophisticated intelligence services, you cannot achieve perfect security. You can only minimize risk, improve detection, assume compromise. The embassy in Moscow today is as secure as modern technology can make it, but every American official working there operates with the knowledge that the Soviets, now Russians, have been trying to penetrate that security for decades, that they are brilliant at it, that they have succeeded before and might succeed again. The Great Seal hangs in a museum now. The NSA National Cryptologic Museum displays it as part of their collection on intelligence history. Visitors can see the wooden carving, beautiful as ever. They can see photographs of the hidden cavity, the small resonator that caused so much damage. But they cannot fully grasp what it meant to the diplomats who spoke freely in its presence for 7 years, believing they were secure. Cannot understand the sick feeling when those officials learned their conversations had been monitored, cannot appreciate the strategic consequences of having the Soviet Union listening to America's most sensitive diplomatic discussions throughout the early Cold War. The Great Seal bug was more than just a technical achievement. It was a demonstration of Soviet ingenuity, of their willingness to exploit any opportunity, of their long-term thinking in intelligence operations. Presenting the seal to Harriman in 1945 was planning for the future. The Soviets knew the alliance would not last, knew that soon America would be the enemy, and they were already preparing. That is strategic thinking at its most ruthless and effective, not just reacting to current circumstances, but creating future capabilities. Embedding surveillance in a gift given during friendship, knowing it would yield intelligence during conflict. Western intelligence learned from this, became more suspicious of gifts, started assuming that any object from a hostile power might be compromised. The paranoia became institutional, embedded in procedures and protocols. But the Soviets were always a step ahead in Moscow. It was their territory, their city. They controlled who came and went, who worked in the embassy, who delivered supplies. The Americans could improve their security, but they could never achieve absolute confidence in their facilities. This is the reality of espionage in the Cold War. Both sides constantly penetrating each other's security, both sides deploying technologies the other does not fully understand, both sides accepting that some level of compromise is inevitable and trying to minimize the damage. The Great Seal bug stands out because of its audacity and longevity. 7 years is an eternity in intelligence operations. Most surveillance devices are discovered within months, if not sooner. But this one, hidden in plain sight, operating on principles Western intelligence had not encountered, lasted through multiple ambassadors and hundreds of sensitive conversations. How many other devices were there? How many bugs, hidden with equal ingenuity, were never discovered? These are questions that haunt intelligence professionals, because for every device you find, how many more remain undetected? The answer is unknowable, but the Great Seal bug suggests that the number might be higher than anyone wants to admit. That the Soviets were better at surveillance than the West gave them credit for. That the balance of intelligence gathering might have been more in their favor than was publicly acknowledged. This has implications beyond the Cold War, because the techniques developed then are still used today. Passive resonator technology has evolved, but the principle remains. Surveillance devices that emit nothing unless activated externally, that evade standard detection methods, that can hide in ordinary objects. Modern security sweeps must account for these possibilities, must use active illumination, must assume that any object might be compromised. The lessons of the Great Seal bug remain relevant because the physics remains the same and the adversaries remain sophisticated. The children who presented the seal in 1945 were pawns, of course, probably had no idea what was hidden inside the gift they offered. They were part of Soviet propaganda, building friendship narratives, while intelligence operatives built surveillance capabilities. But those children grew up in the Soviet system. Some of them probably went on to work in intelligence themselves. Some might have eventually learned what role they played in one of the most successful espionage operations of the Cold War. What did they think decades later when the story became public? Pride in Soviet ingenuity? Shame at having been used? Indifference born of living in a system where everyone was used for state purposes? The human stories behind intelligence operations are often lost in the technical details and strategic analyses. But they matter, because espionage is ultimately about people making devices, people planting them, people failing to detect them, people speaking freely in rooms they believe are secure, and people, eventually, discovering the truth and having to live with the consequences of that discovery. The consequences for American diplomacy were severe, not just the immediate loss of secrets, but the long-term damage to confidence. How do you negotiate effectively when you must assume your internal deliberations are being monitored? How do you develop strategy when the enemy might be listening to your planning sessions? You adapt. You compartmentalize. You use secure facilities for the most sensitive discussions and accept that everything else might be compromised. You employ deception, conducting staged conversations in rooms you suspect are bugged, feeding false information to mislead the adversary. This is the spy versus spy reality of Cold War diplomacy, where nothing is simple, where every conversation might have an invisible audience, where security is a constant battle against increasingly sophisticated threats. The Great Seal bug was discovered in 1952, but it was not publicly revealed until 1960. The Americans kept it secret for 8 years, studying the technology, developing countermeasures, trying to understand the full extent of Soviet capabilities. The revelation came during a dramatic moment. At the United Nations, the American ambassador displayed the seal and explained how it had been used to surveil the American embassy. The demonstration was part of broader tensions, accusations and counter-accusations about espionage flying between East and West. The Soviets offered no real response. The evidence was undeniable. The device was there. The technology was real. They neither confirmed nor denied, simply moved on, as they always did when caught. But the message was sent. Both sides now knew that the surveillance war had reached new levels of sophistication, that ordinary objects could hide extraordinary devices, that security would require constant vigilance and ever-improving technology. The Great Seal bug changed espionage forever, not immediately, not dramatically, but in the long accumulation of paranoia and procedure it inspired. Every security protocol written after 1952 had to account for the possibility of passive surveillance devices. Every sweep had to be more thorough. Every assumption of security had to be questioned. This is its legacy, not just a specific intelligence coup, but a demonstration that changed how intelligence professionals think about security, that forced them to imagine threats they had not conceived of. That proved the enemy might be more ingenious than anticipated. And in the world of espionage, imagination matters, because the threats you cannot imagine are the ones that compromise you. The devices you do not think to look for are the ones that remain hidden. The technologies you assume are impossible are the ones the enemy develops first. The Great Seal bug taught that lesson with painful clarity, and American intelligence has never forgotten it. Today, when security professionals sweep a facility, they think about the Great Seal. When they examine gifts or objects brought into secure spaces, they remember. When they develop new detection technologies, they consider what might be possible that they have not yet imagined. Because somewhere, in some laboratory, in some adversary nation, engineers are working on the next generation of surveillance technology, devices that will evade current detection methods, techniques that will exploit vulnerabilities nobody has considered yet. The espionage war never ends. The technology evolves, the methods adapt, but the goal remains constant: to see and hear what the adversary wants to keep hidden. To penetrate security they believe is absolute. To prove again and again that secrets are hard to keep in a world of ingenious enemies. The wooden seal hanging in its museum display is a monument to that reality. Beautiful and sinister, a work of art and a weapon of espionage, a gift from children and a tool of intelligence services. It is the perfect symbol of the Cold War itself, where nothing was as it seemed, where friendship masked hostility, where beauty concealed danger, where a simple carved seal could hide a device that changed the course of history. And it reminds us that in the world of intelligence, the most dangerous threats are often the ones hiding in plain sight, the devices you do not think to search for, the technologies you do not imagine exist, the vulnerabilities you assume you have closed but remain open to adversaries more creative than you anticipated. The Great Seal bug was discovered 70 years ago, but its lessons remain urgent, because human ingenuity in the service of espionage is limitless, and the next breakthrough might be happening right now, in some secret facility, waiting to be deployed against an unsuspecting target, just as that wooden seal waited, hanging innocently on the wall, for 7 years before anyone realized what it truly was. If these stories fascinate you, where ordinary objects conceal extraordinary secrets, where technology and espionage merge into something terrifying and brilliant, where the Cold War was fought in whispers and hidden devices. Then join us as we explore more chapters of intelligence history. Subscribe to uncover the bugs and breakthroughs, the surveillance and counter-surveillance, the technological arms race that defined an era. Because the Great Seal bug is just one story among many, one device among thousands, one breakthrough in a decades-long battle between intelligence services deploying ever more sophisticated technologies. And those stories of ingenuity and paranoia, of success and failure, of the invisible war fought in embassies and safe houses around the world deserve to be told.